I had an interesting experience I'd like to share with you from last Friday. I think you asked me, so how do you live this out? How do you, given that we're accepted into a union with God through Jesus Christ, and that we're already given a status that is, well, just unimaginable, really. And all I could say was, well, just live it out naturally, and you accept it and talk about it naturally, like you would.
Yep.
And anyway, just after we'd been talking, I went up to the fruit shack up on the hill, and as I shuffled through to the line with my basket of veggies and fruit, the lady in front of me had she I don't know, she must have I don't know how it happened, but anyway, she had this cardboard box that they'd given her, full of veggies and fruit. I didn't look to see what was in there, a pumpkin, but obviously it was far too heavy for her. She was just over middle-aged or so, and so I said, without even thinking, "Here, let me carry it out to the car for you." And she, of course, said, no, it's all right, I'll do it myself.
Yeah.
And she obviously was facing a dilemma. It was funny, actually. And so I asked the lady, look, is it okay if I just run this out, carry this box out for this lady, and I leave my stuff here? And she said, she gave me permission. So I took hold of the box and told her to lead the way. She really was in a dilemma because it was crowded, and there was no parking except right down the bottom of the street there. It's about a block away.
Yeah.
So we toddle off down there, and she shares just a little bit with me about how she's got sore shoulders from being a legal typist, I think. And no, it was just a pleasant chat, as you do, and I was very conscious that I had to get back as I was holding up the line, and so I didn't want to start a conversation, but she opened up the back, and I put the box of fruit in, and I just said, and she was being so thankful, and she didn't know how she would have done it if I hadn't come and helped her and all the rest of it, and I just said, done in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. and thought that with that I could nick back up to the cashier and keep the line moving. And she looked up in surprise and said, "Are you a Christian?" And we then did have to have just a very short discussion, and she's a Christian too. But what it taught me was that living that life of union with God, it's not just a matter of talk, but it's really about action. And the action is love. You know, if you're going to be in, God is love, and if you're going to live in union with Him, then you have to express outwardly that sort of love that is practical, does things. And because we've just been talking about it, and I thought there was more to the answer that I gave. It's not just a matter of talking about your union with God, but it's showing it, just living it out spontaneously. And it was a perfect little lesson for me, just that God is love. And I think actually in John chapter 4, John wrote there, God is love, and he who lives his life in love is living in God, and God is living in him.
1 John 4?
Yeah, 1 John.
Yep.
Chapter 4, his letter.
Yeah.
So, anyway, that's my full wisdom now. Excuse me, that's my full wisdom now.
Yeah, that's great.
It was good. It was just a good feeling to be, to know that God is communicating. It says that actually later on in John's Gospel in chapter 14. He whom, if you know my commandments and do them, you will be loved by the Father, and I will love you and reveal myself to you. That revelation from God comes in the ordinary flow of life, like helping a lady take her vegetables and fruit down to a car.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that idea of that last little bit that we read about how we listen to his voice, he knows us, and then we follow him. So yeah, I've just been reflecting a lot on that, and what does that actually look like to listen to his voice? And I think also in that to be known, I found it quite difficult this last. So we've had in Victoria, we've had a couple of weeks back, sort of normal, and then before that lockdown for 2 weeks, and I found that whole last lockdown process and this new one quite challenging, because I think it is that stripping away of things that you do. You know, it's really hard to separate your identity from what you do, and what you contribute. And I just feel the frustration with being part of community in just feeling like I can't plan anything. And there's something about planning good things that helps you feel like you're doing something useful. Because you've got an event coming up, or someone's coming over, or something's happening. And so really just left with thinking, okay, what is there left? Well, I can listen to his voice, and I can follow him, and I can rest in the fact that I'm known by the Good Shepherd.
Yeah, I think that's the clue.
Right, known really deeply. And obviously those, that we're loved, and that sort of knowing is not just, I think, from what I understand of that idea of knowing in the New Testament scriptures, it's more than just a knowing about that God knows about me, but that it's more like that sort of union and deep connection and experience.
Absolutely.
So, and that's where, from God's side, he knows me. Yeah. So trying to have that as the foundation, and then to do things out of that, I suppose, is, and I mean, that's what the New Testament's on about a lot of the time, isn't it? Like Paul is always, know who you are. You are light. It says in Ephesians 5, you are light. Live then as children of the light. So it's know who you are and what your identity is, and then out of that live. Yeah. So know what God's done for you and who you are, and then live out of that. So it's that challenge of what that looks like when there's not really all the normal ways to express that. And that's a pretty interesting one. And how to, like all the things that we haven't been able to do, I just start to feel like, all the momentum's going to go out of everything. And, what's God doing in all of that, and what's his voice saying through that challenge? Yeah, that's what I'm trying to get to.
Well, I think the Lord's taking you in the right direction. It's knowing that you're known. Oftentimes I've asked people, do you know Christ? And I'm not sure whether well, it's a good question, actually, because it can be taken, do you know about Christ? And if you don't, I'd really love to share it with you. Or do you know Christ? Have you made that connection yourself, and you have an intimate relationship? Are you a Christian?
Yeah.
Do you know Christ? But the real issue isn't so much whether we know Christ, but whether he knows us. And it's a confidence that he knows us, I think, that is the mark of that abiding in him, or the contemplative life. And oftentimes we get taken into what did the mystics called it? The dark night of the soul.
Yeah.
Where you really have to struggle to believe that God knows you. If he knows me and he knows I'm suffering like this, why the heck doesn't he do something about it?
Yeah.
And you have to come to terms with the fact that good things happen from the good God, even if it doesn't look good to us.
Yeah.
What you're experiencing, I know the feeling. you're a leader, and you can't help but feel something of the burden of keeping the momentum going. You said it well. Just making sure that the realities of the kingdom of God aren't covered over and obliterated by the things that are going on in this world, or even distorted by the things that are going on in this world. That people keep a clear vision of God as he really is, sovereign God. Yeah, and I think that that experience that you have as a leader is going to happen to you as you get old. You can't base your identity upon what you do, what you're causing to happen.
Yeah.
Your identity has to be that you are known by God. Why John wrote, the disciple whom Jesus loved. He was an old man, and I don't know what else he had done all his life besides follow Jesus for 3 years and write his epistles and this gospel. But yeah, the thing that his identity at the end was just that he was the disciple whom Jesus loved. That's lovely, and we have to get there. As you get older and older and older, you don't have a choice. That's all that's left.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Not Alia, Ainsley, she works with old people a lot through what she does as a speech pathologist, and she just says over and over again, these people they're sick, they've had strokes, there's things gone wrong, they've got nothing left, and it's just like she just keeps saying, you've got to work on your character. Says this to our kids, you've got to work on your character now, so that when everything's taken away when you're old, it doesn't completely destroy you.
Yeah.
And I mean, it will. It's still, I suppose, you've still got to feel the pain and the struggle of it when you go through those hard things when you get old. But to have that solid foundation there, that's still there, that you're really loved. And I suppose it's a thing like you sort of know it. And, if you had to do a test, you'd be able to write the answer really easily. I know that I'm known by God.
Yeah. Yeah.
But for that to actually make a difference, when you're in some kind of circumstance which is challenging or, pushing you outside of what's comfortable for you, then what does that actually look like? Do you have the resources and the habits to be able to turn to that truth?
Yeah.
And for that to shape the way you respond to that situation, but also to other people with humility and grace and a peace, I guess.
A lot of it has to be, it's called the fruit of the Spirit, but like with everything, I think there's God's part and our part. We have to cooperate in order for that fruit to be fulfilled in our lives. And it starts there with the knowledge that you're known by God, and to keep that fresh in your mind. Well, I don't know what other people might do, but for me, reading, memorizing, meditating on the Word of God gives, well, Jesus called it, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes out of the mouth of God. I think our spiritual life has to be nourished deliberately by us.
Yeah.
And it starts, I think, with reading and understanding in a, I don't know how to put this, it's got its own truth, just the historico-grammatical word that is written down there in front of us that we understand with our minds, but it's understanding all that is implied by what we're reading for ourselves personally. It's appropriating it. It's eating it. and along with that is being able to focus your mind on communicating with God in spite of, kids say, how can I I can't see God, so how do I know he's here?
Yeah.
It's just that focus that you talk to him, even if you feel like you're talking to yourself sometimes.
Yeah. And I suppose where that really hits the wall is when disappointments come in your life.
Yeah.
And where do you turn, or what sort of habits do you have for where you turn when that sort of thing happens? You know, what's the story that you're going to live by when the disappointments come? Do you kind of get bitter and forget God and turn somewhere else, or is that story, his story, so firmly sort of placed in our lives that it actually, you know, that's where we get the resources to respond to the challenges from?
Yeah, some words from Job when he had his plague and was suffering, suffering also his friends trying to help him. Somewhere in there he says, that, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. But,
Yeah.
I think there's I don't know whether it's heroic or whether it's desperation, but just that realization that like the couple who had had a business failure, and the husband said to his wife, I've tried everything I can. The only thing left is prayer. And his wife said, oh, George, don't tell me it's come to that. I think that's how we often feel. We have to handle it ourselves and all ourselves. But it comes a time when the best we can do is just simply give in.
Yep. And I can see, you know, even just in talking about this now with you, as soon as we start thinking about this kind of thing, you automatically turn to the stories that, you know, bring hope, or where you've seen someone persevere. So you mentioned Job, and
Yeah.
you know, if you think of all those sort of things. Yeah.
Yeah. And the hard thing, and I think the thing that we all need to practice on, perhaps you personally, Lucas, is joy. The fruit of the Spirit is joy. And it's not just a matter of feeling, being sure of your identity, but it's also a matter of being joyful. How do you put it? I don't know how to put it, except having a merry spirit, I suppose.
Yeah.
Written in the edge of a manuscript. I read this when I was reading medieval history, but it was a medieval monk copying scriptures, and I can imagine him looking out the window and springtime and seeing the cherry trees blossoming and so on. That he wrote, "Man, please thy Maker and be merry, and give for the world not a cherry."
Yeah.
Having an attitude like that and letting yourself feel it
Yeah.
could make you a bit of a nuisance, I suppose.
Yeah. But I suppose people like me have a tendency to look at the worst.
Be gloomy,
Yeah.
puddle glum.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, was there anything more we had to say about? I think we're kind of ready to move on to this next section of chapter 10.
I think so. I think we've, although just this morning again, I got the last bit of that last section. Is it verse 20:21, when Jesus had talked about being the good shepherd, and that he, as a good shepherd, was going to lay down his life for his sheep, and their response was, these words once again caused a split among the Jews. Many of them said, he's possessed, he's raving. Why listen to him? Others said, no one possessed by an evil spirit could speak like this. Could an evil spirit open blind men's eyes? And then it moves into the next section where they get to Jesus and they ask him whether he really is the Messiah or not. Say so plainly.
Yeah.
His response was, I've told you. But it sort of hit me again that the two things that Jesus was offering, well, he was offering himself, but those who were listening to him there were two things that he presented. One was the words that he said, and the other was the deeds that he did. And the two were meant to come together as to prove that he really was from God, and that they needed to rethink their whole take on what God had done with Israel in his revelation through the law and the prophets, and accept that there was a bigger thing happening. There was a fulfillment coming, that God was fulfilling all of his promises and his hopes, which went so far beyond Israel, bigger. The Messiah wasn't to be just the light, was it the safety of his people, but a light to the nations. And all of this was happening right there before their eyes, and Jesus was showing it in his words and in his deeds, and they were stuck in their interpretation of the Old Testament, which he, of course, was, even from the start of John, Jesus was challenging that by throwing all the traders out of the temple at the first Passover that he went to with his disciples. That's showing that things are wrong. They need to be corrected. You need to rethink. You need to change your whole way of thinking about yourselves and God. And it all boiled down to their response to what he said and what he did. It's the same today. We also need to respond to what Jesus said and to what Jesus did.
Yeah. And then what we do is a combination of we believe and we act.
Yeah, absolutely.
The same
I don't think you can even separate those two things. It'd be good if we knew that believing meant acting. There should be another word for believing just about things.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. So verse 22, it says it's the festival of dedication. We got any idea how long after that previous speech that Jesus made? Like the last time we identify a festival, what was back at the start of chapter 5, was it?
Chapter 7.
Chapter 7
is when it went up to the Feast of Tabernacles.
Yeah, the Tabernacles, yeah.
And that was in October, November, somewhere in there. And the Feast of Dedication was about the middle of December. So it's this whole section from chapter 7, 8, 9, 10 is just a 2-month period when Jesus brought things to a climax before the final climax. It was sort of the preparation for the final run.
Yep.
Second last lap. But it's the full presentation of who he is and what God was doing in the world, and the need for us to step across into the new world rather than to cling on to the old world, the past. That's
so John says it was winter. So it's winter, it's the festival of dedication. It's in Jerusalem. Jesus walking in the temple precincts in Solomon's cloister. I like the fact that he is, like, you can obviously picture in his mind when this happened.
Yeah.
He can remember that it was winter. He obviously knows what festival it was, but that also Jesus was walking in the temple precinct in Solomon's cloister. And
probably the reference there, two things. I think the Feast of Dedication is pretty important. Talk about that in a minute, but in line with what you're saying, to connect that, because it says earlier, I think it's in chapter 7, that Jesus went up to the temple and was teaching, and the people were saying, where does he get this from? And he said how he's sharing the message that God had given him to share. And I think that's that saying that if anyone is willing to do God's will, he will know whether the message I speak is from myself or it's from God, or from God or merely from myself. So teaching in the temple during that festival at the very start, Tabernacles, the week of Tabernacles, in the temple, that would have been crowded, and I suppose being there would be a good place for Jesus to preach. It was the focus of the crowds and the festivals and that sort of thing. But there's another festival going on. I'm not sure. I think that was a popular festival as well. But here there's the added kind of he needed to get out of the wind. It was cold. It's December, or northern hemisphere December, and just that the way our memories work, it links things together like that. And I can imagine John being conscious that it was good to be out of the cold while Jesus was teaching. Now, maybe I'm just imagining things, but I get this feel that the fact that it was winter. If he'd said it was the festival of dedication, he didn't need to say it was winter time, because that always came the December. This is just that little, for me it seems to be anyway, one of those little personal recollections that meant something to him, and so he just said it.
Yeah.
The way it was.
And it sort of, it connects the story, or it sort of secures the story back into an actual setting, a time and a place in history.
Yeah.
And it's extraordinary things happening and extraordinary ideas breaking into the ordinary here and now. That you can have Jesus talking about this in amazing stuff, I and the Father are one, and those sort of statements like that. But that, John also remembers that it was cold.
Just that. There's a good feel to that. I think it's what we were talking about before, is letting your natural life be spiritual and your spiritual life be natural. It sort of ties in with that experience of knowing that you're in union with God and then doing God-like things around you.
But just in the ordinary context of what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, God feeds, like Jesus said, he feeds the sparrows and waters the forests, and it's just nature works because God works. Yeah.
So, any significance for the fact of what the contents of what Jesus is about to sort of reveal and say, and the link back to it being the festival of dedication?
Oh yeah, I think so. Festival of dedication marked the cleansing of the temple back in 186 BC. Remember the rebellion of the Maccabees against the Greek overlords, and they had fought a guerrilla campaign for 3 years where they had completely defeated the Greek legions that were sent, the phalanxes that were fearsome battle machines, really, and by guerrilla warfare, taking them by surprise, and speed, and their weapon was their bows, sheep-horn bows that could rain. They used to call it Judean rain, just up in the air, and then a hail of arrows falling down on all these Greek warriors, all dressed up in their armor. Was anyway, the victory of the Maccabees over against the Greek overlords and their setting up of an independent nation. And the actual trouble with what had sparked this conflict between the Greek rulers and their Judean subjects that brought about the rebellion was that Antiochus IV had determined that he was going to make the Jews become proper Greeks, that he was going to abolish their religion completely. And part of that was to defile the temple and terrible persecution. And the books, Book of Maccabees, first and second Book of Maccabees detail the horrible things that happened in that effort by the rulers to really stamp out the worship of Yahweh and the Jewish religion. And then the victory of the Maccabees. So it's a heroic story worth reading. Anyway, that had meant that they were given their independence enough to be able to set up their temple worship again. And so there was a whole set, like the work of cleansing the temple of all the pagan stuff that had been put there, and all the ceremonies to purify it and set it up, and then the first sacrifices to Yahweh.
Because they had sacrificed a pig in there, hadn't they?
Yeah. And just the recollection of that deliverance by God, because they saw God in it, of course, both the victory to the Maccabees and the resetting of the temple and Simon as the high priest. That was celebrated for a week every year, and it was a really joyful celebration. It was recognizing that God had heard their prayers when they were being really badly persecuted, oppressed, and had set them free and gave them back their temple for worship. So it was a popular festival, and I think that two things that kind of come into my mind is, one is Jesus had cleansed the temple in chapter 2.
Yep.
That was his first coming to notice of the rulers, that he had struck a blow for God and for righteousness and for doing things properly, and had tried to cleanse the temple, which of course was exactly what the Maccabees had done. And now here it is, the Feast of Dedication once again, and people are remembering that deliverance, and Jesus is trying to say, look, there's another deliverance that needs to happen. Yep. You're in a worse shape now before God than you really were under the Maccabees. Then you were holding the faith under persecution, but now you guys, you've lost the plot completely. This, what you were doing, is not the way it should be. And the evidence, of course, is that the highest court in the land went right ahead and then crucified him as their Messiah, because he said that he was their Messiah, over against the facts. His miracles that stood there, his signs. So there's a real, just the fact that Jesus cleansed the temple, and at the beginning of his ministry, I think that's a symbol, a sign that God is coming to put things right again, just like he did in the time of the Maccabees. And Jesus is using that festival in order to connect the two things together, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe it was just coincidence. Maybe that's just the way it happened. But I think perhaps the fact that John mentioned it meant that there was some recognition, at least in the disciples' minds, that Jesus was playing this card at this time.
At that time, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's probably, we've probably run out of time. So that's can serve as our little introduction to this next section for next time.
We better get into the text.
Yeah, and we'll get into the text. But that's good.
Good. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Lloyd. It's great. See you soon.